Hi there, young sculptors. In this video we're going to be looking at covering your piggy bank form with paper mache. So what you're going to need with this is your form that you've already made using your balloon, tape, and your recycled materials to make that piggy bank shape. Other thing you're going to need is your mixture of paper mache glue, so flour, water, and salt. If you can't use flour because you don't have it or you have an allergy, you can mix some of that school glue with a little bit of water, just a little bit, to thin it down a little bit, and it'll work almost as good. But I like this because usually you have that around the house and it works really well. So the paper you're going to be using is something thin, so that could be newspaper. It could be like printer paper, notebook paper, but you want to tear most of it into pieces no bigger than the palm of your hand. Any bigger than that and it makes it harder to work with. There is an exception to that and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what you're going to do with those is you're going to dip it in your mixture of flour, water, and salt, your homemade glue. And your first main goal with this sculpture is to try to cover the balloon first. And with that, I want to make sure that in the end I can't see the balloon. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that this is one of the few sculptures that we're going to make where the form that you're using is temporary, because when we're done, this balloon is going to disappear for one of two reasons. Either it pops or the air leaks out of it over time. So we've got to cover this balloon, because then once the paper mache dries, it's going to hold that shape and we're not going to need the balloon anymore. So before I cover any of those things that I made, that I attached to my balloon, I'm trying to cover the balloon first. So I'm not worried about covering my ears yet. I'm not worried about covering my nose or legs or any of that. I'm just trying to cover my balloon first. So in a way, at first I'm trying to actually go around things. One other important thing is that you'll see that I'm having all of my pieces touch one another, so they're overlapping. So I'm putting this piece where it's even going over top of that. And the reason for overlapping is that whenever you have two pieces, instead of them just being side by side, if they overlap, where they overlap, you get two pieces, you get two layers of paper mache instead of one. And the more layers you have in this case, the better. So if you were at our school last year and you made a dinosaur, you'll remember that we only had to cover that dinosaur one time and it was fine and you were good. This time is different because you don't have that whole recycled material form of the plastic bottle and the toilet paper tubes that made up that dinosaur. You have a balloon instead. So to really be done with this and for it to be a usable piggy bank, you're going to actually need to cover this thing probably 3 times. I've found 3 to be a good magic number for the number of times that you need to cover this and it hold its shape really well when that balloon gets popped. So try to cover it 3 times if you can. So what I'm trying to do now is look for places where I still see my balloon. Do you see any? Yep, there. typically when we're doing this in art class, our goal for the first day is to just cover the entire balloon, and most of us are able to do that. So I wouldn't suggest doing all of what I'm going to show you in this video in one sitting, because it can take a while. So usually in art class we would do this over the course of like 2 sessions, 2 art classes, maybe even 3. But you might be able to work a little faster from home, or a little slower, just depending. So go at your own kind of pace. And if you have other things you have to do, come back to it a little bit later. Around this, what's going to be our makeshift cork, I'm trying to get as close to around it as I can. So I'm kind of taking little pieces, little rectangles, and go around it to hold that in place. And that would be something we keep there until we want to actually take money out of it. But I'm going to try to get pieces as close to it as I can. But that's going to be one of our few things that we don't actually cover up. That and this little piggy tail. Alright, so I think I've got everything mostly. We'll talk about covering other things now. Alright, these legs. I told you in the beginning that there would be some things that we did use long pieces for, and that would be the legs. And here's how the legs are going to work. The legs are going to where we're going to use long pieces. So I'm going to take pieces that are more like the length of my hand. And what I like to do with those is drape them over it to cover it up. So you end up kind of making almost like a star pattern with it. So I'm going over it and I'm going to make a plus sign. And then I'm going to do 2 diagonals. And I'll show you another way to do it too, because I find just about every year that I've done this that different artists, different students like to do the legs in different ways. So one way is what I just did, where I made a plus sign, plus, and then diagonals, like a multiplication sign over it. So you end up kind of covering it with a star. So that's one way of doing it. And if you have little pieces, like I have this little piece here that's sticking up, I'll put another piece over it. So anytime I have a piece that's not wanting to listen and do what I'm wanting it to do, usually it just means taking another piece and kind of laying over it and using the weight of that other piece to hold it down. Alright, so option number 2, if you don't want to do the crisscrossing method, is get a big old piece of paper and with that big piece of paper we're going to just drape that over the whole thing, kind of press it down, and then do sort of my quality check of looking for places where it's not wanting to cooperate and put little pieces on it. And I just made that way look a lot easier than most people normally find it. So if you think, ooh, that big piece method looks really good, Mr. Silo, that looks so easy, then maybe try that way first and see how it works for you. Like, it looked pretty good for me right there, so I'll probably try it again on that side. Alright, but I'm going to move on and we're going to talk about some other places. So your snout, you want to cover the same way. So either big pieces or diagonal. With the ears, what I like to do is take one piece of newspaper and what I'll do is I'll kind of put it behind it like that, and then I'm going to fold it over and fold it over. That way that's covered with newspaper and it'll stay in place. So fold and fold. And so that's what you need to do to get your first layer of everything covered. With the tail, you don't need to cover, if you made a pipe cleaner tail, you don't need to cover it. Only make sure the tape is covered. So your goal is to cover everything with paper mache. Once you have everything covered, let that dry. It's going to take about a day for it to dry, depending on how wet you left your stuff, but it's going to take about a day. Once it's dry, you're going to need to cover the balloon a second and third time. You do not need to cover any of these extra pieces you added on. So I only need to cover the ears once, only cover the snout once, only cover my legs one time, but the balloon 3 times. So once, let it dry. 2 times, let it dry. 3 times, let it dry, and then it should be good enough that you could cut a small slit in there. How you color it is up to you. If you have paint, you can paint it after that 3rd time. If you want to do like a collage cover of it, so like you cover it up with like magazine pages or colorful newspaper or tissue paper, whatever kind of paper you have, if you try to do collage to cover it, that could be your 3rd layer. So don't give yourself more work and do a 4th layer of color. Have that, if you're going to do collage to color it, have that be your 3rd layer. Okay? So don't give yourself more work than you have to do. But I hope this helps. I would love to see how your piggy banks turn out, and happy making. Have a great day.